In the shadow of a destroyed city, far away from prying eyes, a mysterious and unsettling event took place. Lot and his daughters, having narrowly escaped the fiery destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, found themselves isolated in a cave, cut off from the world they once knew. What happened next has puzzled readers for centuries and remains one of the most controversial stories in the Bible. The actions of Lot's daughters have sparked debate, confusion, and curiosity. Why did they take such drastic measures? What could possibly drive them to such an unthinkable decision? The story unfolds in an era of survival and desperation, where fear often blurred the lines of morality. Yet, the full explanation of their actions is far more complex and layered than it might seem at first glance. As we dive deeper into this ancient account, we'll explore the cultural, emotional, and spiritual forces at play, examining how one family's choices shaped entire nations. But before we uncover their motivations, we must first look at the world they left behind and the challenges they faced in their isolation. The story of Lot and his daughters is set against the backdrop of one of the Bible's most infamous cities, Sodom. Lot and his family were residents of this morally corrupt city, and when God decided to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his daughters barely escaped with their lives. Guided by angels, they fled to safety, but Lot's wife was tragically turned into a pillar of salt when she looked back at the destruction. This left Lot and his daughters alone, isolated and fearful of what the future held. Lot and his daughters eventually took refuge in a cave where the true controversy of their story unfolds. With the destruction of their home and the loss of their mother, the daughters were consumed with fear and uncertainty. In their minds, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah may have seemed like the end of the world, leaving them as the last survivors on earth. This fear, combined with the desire to preserve their family line, led them to make a drastic and controversial decision. Lot's daughters chose to lay with their father, believing that it was the only way to continue their family's lineage. This decision has been the subject of much debate as it challenges moral boundaries and confronts the human instinct for survival. The Bible presents this act without much commentary, allowing readers to wrestle with the motivations and implications of their actions. What drove them to such desperation, and how does this story fit within the broader biblical narrative? As we look deeper into this tale, it's essential to understand the cultural and emotional context that shaped Lot's daughters' decision. Their world had been turned upside down, and they were left to navigate an uncertain future with little guidance. The fear of extinction weighed heavily on their minds, and their actions were rooted in survival. But to truly grasp their motivations, we must explore the moral decay of the environment they had left behind in Sodom. Lot's escape from Sodom and Gomorrah is where this tragic story truly begins. After years of living in Sodom, Lot and his family were warned by angels of its impending destruction. The cities were about to be consumed by fire and brimstone because of their overwhelming wickedness. Lot, though hesitant, heeded the angel's warning and fled with his daughters. But what happened next laid the foundation for the complex decisions that followed. As they fled, Lot's wife disobeyed the angel's command and looked back, resulting in her turning into a pillar of salt. This left Lot and his daughters devastated, not only losing their home, but also their mother. They found themselves in a cave, isolated from the world. With no one left to guide them, Lot's daughters began to fear for their future. The weight of the destruction they witnessed, combined with the loss of their mother, placed them in a state of emotional and psychological turmoil. The story takes an unexpected turn in this cave. The daughters, believing that they were the last people on earth, began to think about the survival of their family line. They thought the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah had wiped out humanity. In their minds, they were facing the extinction of their family and possibly the human race itself. This sense of isolation and hopelessness became the catalyst for their controversial decision. This part of the story sets the stage for the drastic actions that would follow. The destruction of their city and the loss of their mother led Lot's daughters to feel that they had no other choice. While modern readers may find their actions shocking, understanding their situation helps explain the desperation they felt. Before we judge their decision, we must consider the cultural and emotional factors that influenced them. Their choice was not made lightly, nor was it without its consequences. The actions they took in that cave would have lasting implications for both their family and the broader biblical narrative. But to truly understand their motivations, we need to examine the mindset of Lot's daughters and how their upbringing in Sodom may have shaped their views on morality and survival. Lot's daughters' motivations are rooted in survival, a primal instinct that drives much of human behavior. After escaping the destruction of Sodom and the loss of their mother, they found themselves alone with their father, isolated in a cave. They believed they were the last people on earth, and the weight of this belief pushed them to make a drastic decision. Their fear of extinction and the desire to preserve their family's legacy led them to take matters into their own hands. In the ancient world, the continuation of a family line was of utmost importance. Without descendants, a family's name and legacy would be erased, leaving nothing behind. Lot's daughters, faced with the belief that they were the last survivors, felt an overwhelming responsibility to ensure the survival of their family. Their decision to lay with their father was not driven by immorality, but by a desire to continue the family line in the face of what they believed was total annihilation. This sense of duty to preserve the family name highlights the cultural context in which Lot's daughters were operating. In ancient times, lineage and legacy were everything. The fear of being the last of their family was likely compounded by the trauma they had just experienced, the destruction of their city, the loss of their mother, and the isolation they felt in the cave. In their minds, there was no other option. Desperation clouded their judgment, leading them to make a decision that would carry significant consequences. The actions of Lot's daughters also reflect the desperation that comes with isolation. They believed they had no other choice, and this sense of helplessness drove them to take extreme measures. While modern readers may struggle to understand their decision, it's essential to consider the emotional and cultural pressures they faced. Their actions were not born out of malice, but out of a deep-seated need to ensure survival. As we reflect on the motivations of Lot's daughters, we must also consider the influence of their environment. Having grown up in Sodom, a city notorious for its moral corruption, their understanding of right and wrong may have been shaped by the depravity around them. In the next section, we'll explore how their upbringing in Sodom influenced their decisions and moral compass. Lot's daughters didn't grow up in a vacuum. They were raised in Sodom, a city notorious for its moral corruption and decay. Living in a place where vice and sin were commonplace would have undoubtedly influenced their understanding of right and wrong. The atmosphere of Sodom wasn't just a physical location, it was a culture that likely affected the values and perceptions of Lot's family. It's no surprise that after witnessing the city's destruction, Lot's daughters might have viewed their desperate actions through a skewed moral lens. The Bible describes Sodom as a place where wickedness reigned, and Lot's family was surrounded by this environment for years. Living in such a corrupt society likely blurred the lines of morality for Lot's daughters. The story of Lot and his daughters highlights the effect of their environment on their choices, especially after losing their home and mother. This helps explain why Lot's daughters laid with him. They were products of a city where moral boundaries had long been broken. Desperation only magnified the effects of their upbringing in Sodom. After the city's destruction, Lot's daughters were isolated in a cave, believing they were the last people on earth. The moral decay of their former home, combined with the fear of extinction, created a perfect storm for their drastic decision. The influence of Sodom's culture can't be ignored when considering how Lot's daughters justified their actions. Their moral compass had been shaped by years of living in a society where survival and indulgence took precedence over righteousness. But the story of Lot in Sodom isn't just about external influences, it's also about how individuals respond to their environment. Lot himself was described as a righteous man, yet his decision to live in Sodom exposed his family to moral decay. Could he have prevented what happened? Perhaps, but the city's influence was strong, and its effects on his daughters were deep-rooted. It raises the question of how much our surroundings shape our values and decisions, even when we try to maintain our faith. As we consider how Sodom's moral decay impacted Lot's daughters, we turn next to Lot himself. His role in this story is more complex than it appears at first glance. Was he a passive victim of circumstance, or did his choices contribute to the events that unfolded? In the next section, we'll explore Lot's role in the story and his silence in the face of such drastic decisions. Lot's role in this narrative is puzzling. As the father and leader of his family, he is expected to provide guidance, especially in times of crisis. Yet, throughout the story, Lot remains a passive figure, silent and uninvolved in the decisions of his daughters. His passivity raises questions about his leadership and his responsibility in the situation. Was Lot merely a victim of his daughters' actions, or does his silence imply a deeper failure to protect and guide his family? Lot had already shown hesitation during his time in Sodom. When the angels warned him to flee, he lingered, reluctant to leave the city behind. His indecisiveness foreshadows his passivity later in the story. In the cave, Lot's daughters made the drastic decision to lay with him, but the Bible gives no indication that Lot resisted or questioned their actions. His silence is striking, especially considering the moral weight of their decision. It suggests that Lot may have been overwhelmed by the trauma of recent events and unable to provide the leadership his daughters needed. This lack of action from Lot invites readers to question his responsibility. As a father, it was his duty to protect his daughters, not only physically but also morally. Yet Lot seems to have abdicated this role, allowing his daughters to make life-altering decisions without his guidance. His failure to act raises questions about his character and his ability to lead his family through a time of crisis. Was Lot so consumed by his own grief and fear that he couldn't see the consequences of his daughter's plan? Lot's passivity is a reminder of the importance of leadership, especially in times of crisis. His silence allowed his daughters to take drastic measures that would have long-lasting effects on their family and the nations that would arise from their lineage. Lot's failure to act is a cautionary tale about the dangers of inaction. When faced with difficult decisions, silence and passivity can have profound consequences. As we reflect on Lot's role in this story, it becomes clear that his silence played a significant part in the events that unfolded. But what were the consequences of his inaction? The birth of Moab and Ammon marked the beginning of a new chapter in biblical history, one that would have lasting implications for Israel. In the next section, we'll explore the significance of these two nations and their impact on the biblical narrative. The birth of Moab and Ammon marked the next chapter in the aftermath of Lot's daughter's actions. These two sons, born out of an act of desperation, would go on to father two nations that played pivotal roles in biblical history. Moab and Ammon, the sons of Lot's daughters, became the ancestors of the Moabites and Ammonites, two peoples who would have a long and complicated relationship with Israel. Their origins were controversial, but their impact on the biblical narrative was undeniable. The Moabites and Ammonites became frequent adversaries of Israel, often clashing with God's chosen people throughout biblical history. Despite their contentious origins, these two nations were integral to the unfolding story of Israel. The Moabites, for example, played a role in the Book of Ruth, where Ruth, a Moabite woman, would eventually become the great-grandmother of King David. This connection between Moab and Israel demonstrates how even flawed beginnings can lead to redemptive outcomes. The birth of Moab and Ammon also highlights the lasting consequences of Lot's daughter's decision. What began as an act of desperation in a cave led to the formation of two nations whose presence would be felt for generations. The story of Lot and his daughters serves as a reminder that even the most controversial actions can have far-reaching effects, shaping the course of history in unexpected ways. The decisions made in moments of fear and uncertainty can leave a legacy that endures long after the initial crisis has passed. But the story of Moab and Ammon isn't just about conflict and controversy. It also demonstrates how God can work through even the most flawed circumstances to bring about his purposes. Despite their complicated origins, the Moabites and Ammonites played crucial roles in the biblical narrative, reminding us that no story is beyond redemption. Their existence serves as a testament to God's ability to use all things, even human mistakes, for his greater plan. As we reflect on the birth of Moab and Ammon, we're reminded of the complexity of human history and the ways in which our actions can shape the future. But what moral lessons can we draw from this story? How does the tale of Lot and his daughters speak to us today? In the next section, we'll explore the moral lessons that can be learned from their actions and the lasting impact of their choices. The story of Lot and his daughters offers complex moral lessons that go beyond their actions. At its core, this narrative forces us to confront how desperation and fear can lead to decisions that have lasting consequences. Lot's daughters acted out of a desire to preserve their family line, but their method was deeply flawed. The story challenges us to consider the ethical dilemmas that arise when survival seems to override morality. It also raises questions about how far people will go to protect their future in the face of uncertainty. One of the key lessons from Lot's daughters' actions is the importance of trust in God's plan, even in desperate situations. The daughters felt isolated and believed they were the last humans on earth, but their decision to take matters into their own hands reflected a lack of faith. This serves as a reminder that in moments of fear, we should turn to God for guidance rather than resorting to extreme measures. It's a lesson that resonates with anyone who has ever faced a seemingly impossible situation. The story also highlights how the consequences of our actions can ripple through history. Lot's daughters, motivated by the desire to ensure survival, inadvertently set the stage for future conflict between the nations of Moab, Ammon, and Israel. Their actions, though understandable in context, created challenges that would endure for generations. This illustrates the importance of considering the long-term effects of our decisions, especially when made in moments of crisis. Another moral takeaway is the importance of leadership and responsibility. Lot's passive role throughout the narrative allowed events to unfold without his intervention. As a father and leader, his silence contributed to the desperation his daughters felt. This teaches us the significance of stepping up in difficult times to guide and protect those who depend on us. Lot's inaction serves as a cautionary tale about the cost of passivity. As we examine the moral lessons from this story, we're left to wonder, could things have been different if Lot or his daughters had made other choices? The story of Lot in Sodom shows that the choices we make, both in times of peace and crisis, have profound implications. With that in mind, let's now explore the cultural context surrounding Lot's daughters' actions and whether such behavior was viewed differently in ancient times. Lot's daughters' actions might seem shocking by today's standards, but to fully understand the story, we must consider the cultural context of the ancient Near East. In their time, lineage and family survival were paramount. The idea of preserving a family line was often seen as more important than following traditional moral boundaries. Lot's daughters believed they were facing extinction, and in that cultural context, their actions could be interpreted as a desperate attempt to fulfill their duty to continue the family line, rather than a purely immoral act. In ancient times, the continuity of a family or tribe was a matter of survival. There were strong societal pressures to ensure that family lines did not die out, particularly among the people of Israel. Without sons to carry on the family name, a family could lose its inheritance, its place in the community, and even its legacy. The fear of being the last in their family may have been what drove Lot's daughters to lay with him, as they saw no other way to ensure the survival of their lineage. In many ancient cultures, certain actions were tolerated or accepted based on the necessity of the moment. While incestuous relationships are condemned in most biblical laws, there are instances in the ancient world where desperate measures were taken to preserve a family. This doesn't necessarily mean that Lot's daughters' actions were seen as acceptable, but it helps explain why they might have believed it was the only solution. Their actions must be viewed through the lens of their time, where family survival outweighed almost all else. The fact that the Bible records this story without overt condemnation may suggest that it serves more as a historical narrative than a moral prescription. Ancient readers would have recognized the complexity of the situation. While Lot's daughter's decision seems morally wrong by modern standards, their behavior reflects the challenging circumstances they faced and the cultural norms of the time. It highlights how extreme situations can blur the lines of right and wrong. As we reflect on this cultural context, it's clear that Lot's daughters didn't act purely out of moral corruption, but out of a culturally ingrained need to preserve their family. This invites us to think more deeply about how culture influences morality and how even in the Bible, we see examples of human imperfection. In the next section, we'll explore the theological implications of this story and how God can work through even the most flawed situations. The story of Lot and his daughters is a prime example of how God can work through even the most flawed and imperfect situations. On the surface, the narrative seems to be one of moral failure and desperation. However, when we take a closer look, we see that God's plan continues to unfold despite human shortcomings. The birth of Moab and Ammon, though controversial, played a role in biblical history and even in the lineage of Jesus Christ. This story reminds us that God can bring redemption out of even the most broken circumstances. In the Bible, God often works through imperfect people and situations. Lot and his daughters were not without their faults, yet their story became part of the larger narrative of God's people. The existence of Moab and Ammon, though rooted in a controversial beginning, shows that God can use even the most unexpected events to fulfill his purposes. This teaches us that no situation is beyond redemption, and that God's plan is always greater than our understanding. Theologically, the story of Lot and his daughters challenges us to trust in God's sovereignty. Even when things seem out of control or morally confusing, God is still at work. The birth of Moab and Ammon may have come from a flawed decision, but it ultimately played a role in the unfolding of God's redemptive plan. This reflects the larger biblical theme that God can use all things for his glory, even when human actions seem misguided. As we reflect on this story, we're reminded that the Bible is filled with stories of imperfect people. Lot, his daughters, and their actions serve as a reminder that no one is beyond redemption. God's grace extends to even the most controversial situations, and he can bring good out of human failure. This story challenges us to look for God's hand at work, even in the messiness of life. The story of Lot's daughters isn't just a cautionary tale about moral decay. It's also a testament to God's ability to bring hope out of despair. As we move to the final section, we'll consider the lasting legacy of Lot's daughters and the nations of Moab and Ammon, and how their stories shaped the future of biblical history. As we journey through the complex narrative of Lot and his daughters, we're left with more than just a story of survival. Their actions, though controversial, became the origin of two nations, Moab and Ammon, whose presence would reverberate through biblical history. What can we take away from such a difficult and morally complicated tale? It challenges us to reflect on our own choices, especially those made in times of desperation, and the lasting impact they can have on the future. The legacy of Lot's daughters serves as a reminder that, even in the most challenging situations, decisions made without clear guidance can shape history in unexpected ways. Their story shows us the deep complexities of human nature and the importance of seeking wisdom and faith in the most trying times. How will we choose to act when faced with our own moments of uncertainty? If you found this story intriguing and want to explore more mysteries of the Bible, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. There's so much more to uncover and learn, and together we'll continue to dive deep into the lessons and legacies found in these ancient stories.